as I said, as I told you, with an increase in wage rates, substitution effect, of course, would make this result. Okay, you consume less leisure and you work more. And the income effect, if leisure for you is a normal good, then with the increase in income, because you got a higher wage rate, so you become richer, your real income increases. And if leisure is normal with an increase in income, you will consume more leisure and you will work less. So you see a conflict between substitution effect and income effect. However, if your leisure is inferior to you, which means when you get richer, you will consume less leisure. Alright? Like if you are workaholic, you know what workaholic is? Yes. If you are workaholic. And this time, the income effect will make you consume less leisure and increase your working hours. So there is no conflict here. As the wage rate increases, you work more. So the supply curve of your labor would be always positive. There is no backward bending. Okay? So if you are a workaholic and you regard leisure as inferior good, just like this, you increase your real income, but you consume less leisure, which means you work more, then there will be no conflict at all. So for a workaholic, or for someone who regard leisure as inferior good, the higher the wage rates, the more the working hours. Okay? And as I asked you to do, to change the notation here, so the notation on the slide with H is because the author who provides the PowerPoint, the author makes this as 0. He used this as the origin. So the horizontal would be working hours. So this would be 24, this would be 0, then H1, H2, H3 is fine. But with the adjustment, just I asked you to do, to change this into N1, N2, and N3. So I regard this as the origin, make it 0 and make it 24. The reason is I'd like to derive the leisure demand for you first. Okay? Because the author skipped the second part. He just derived the labor supply directly. Okay? That's the reason why I ask you to do some adjustment so that you will not skip the second part, the middle step. Okay? Any question here for the labor supply? Would you please wait for, give me 2 minutes. I have something to do now. Do you remember this game we played when you were in your fresh year? Link ring factor, 链环制作工厂。All right. We say something is a function of something and something. So the link ring is produced using capital and labor as the input. Okay? So this is a production function, and we utilize or we adopt capital and labor as our inputs to make link ring. Okay? And at that time, I make a production function here. If you remember. And the reason for this part is by specialization, division of labor and specialization, right? And this is because the diminishing return to labor. So do you remember this? No. IRTS, CRTS, BRTS is about we multiply K and L at the same time. So both capital and labor changed. So it's nothing to do with IRTS, CRTS. Okay? So for this production function is if we just restrict or if we provide you with capital fixed, so you have only one set of the tape and the pencil. Do you remember that? So we make capital fixed, and we need to distinguish something about short run and long run. Short run means there exists at least one factor of production unchanged or fixed. And long run means all inputs can be varied. All inputs can be varied. So with capital fixed, then we talked about short run. So this is actually a short run production function. And if we give your team with two sets of capital, then your production function will be higher. Alright? So remember this? Actually, I remember I drew a So do you remember it's a three-dimensional diagram. And I said, okay, if we cut K at K equals 1, give it a cut. So we have a profile like this. And if we cut k equals 2, another slice, there is another profile. Have any? Yes. So do you remember this? All right. If you were not in my class last year, it's fine. Don't worry about that. And I'll explain here in more details. Let me introduce some tool for you. If we make the horizontal labor and vertical capital. So with this combination of labor and capital, we may do something. We may actually produce some quantity of outputs, right? So with labor 0, capital 0, we may make something, we call it, say, Q0. And probably another combination of inputs may also yield or may also produce the same amount of outputs, Then we connect all points. So all combinations of labor and capital with, say, efficiently, if we produce efficiently. So at most, for all these combinations of inputs, we may produce the same level of outputs, Q0. And we call this kind of curve as isoquant curves. So do you remember the very first time I introduced indifference curve? I introduced indifference curve to you. I say if this is Q1, Q2, so indifference curve, okay? But now it's labor and capital, and we may also have similar curves as indifference curves. So indifference curves, how do we define a indifferent curve? All the points on an indifference curve provides us the same level of utility, right? So all of them, all combinations, if we put them into the function, they provide the same utility level, say U0. Okay? Now, very similar, or almost actually the same. All combinations replaced into the function, we may derive the same output, the same level of output. And we connect all these combinations, we may have an isoquant. So it's just like isoheight. Do you remember isoheight curves? So isoquants. And as you see, the more the better. Now the more the more input combinations, the more output we may have. It's quite intuitive, right? The more input you throw into the production function, you got more outputs as you can, right? So we call this as isoquants. We just switch the model from utility to production, from utility to output, from utility function to production function. Okay? Any question here? The source of utility is from the consumption of Q1 and Q2. Commodity 1, commodity 2, pizza, burrito. Okay? And now the output is from labor, capital. We may have a specific level of output. All right. Now, please notice I'm telling you something important. If I code this as capital 1, fix the capital at this level, and I code this Q0, Q0, Q1, Q2, Q2, Q0, Q1, and Q2, okay? So the isoquants, for this isoquant curve, the output would be Q0. And the isoquant for this curve, the output would be Q1. And the iso curve for this, the quantity, the output would be Q2. Okay? Now, if capital is fixed at capital 1, and when labor L0, L1, L2, L0, L1, L2. This would be correspond to what? With L0 and K1 bar, we have Q0, right? So this would be Q0. And with L1 accompanied with K1 bar, L1 accompanied with K1 bar, the output would be Q1. And labor 2 would be Q2. So you see the correspondence? This diagram with L on the horizontal, with Q on the vertical, is about production function. And this with LK on the horizontal and vertical is the isoquant curves. Okay? So where is the output? Output is here. It's actually a 3D graph. Okay? It's a 3D thing. But we just cut the outputs. Q0, we have a profile here. Q1, Q2. So we just Q0, Q1, Q2 and project on the plane. Okay? Same thing as the utility function. So this is the output function here. Alright? So, what about if K is fixed at K2? Now, K2. L0 will correspond to an output between Q0 and Q1, right? So this will Let me regraph this, redraw the graph. Sorry. If this is K2, accompanied with L0, so you will see there is a not indifference, isoquant. You will see an isoquant. Isoquants should be translated into isoquant curve, 等产量. Okay? Oops. If K2 bar is here, then accompanied with L0, the corresponding isoquant would yield something between Q1 and Q0. So something between Q1 and Q0. With L1, something between Q1 and Q2. Something between Q1 and Q2. With L2, with corresponding something higher than Q2. Something higher than Q2. So it's K1 bar, K2 bar. Understand the difference between these two diagrams. The very first thing I want you to learn is to find the correspondence between these two. And actually, the curves here is a short-run production function. And for this, because you may change L and K, so without any restriction and without any limitation, it actually can be used or can be adopted to analyze long-run issue. So we analyze long-run issue with isoquant curves. Okay? But the very first thing I want you to know is that even with LK isoquant diagram, which is basically for analysis of long-run issue, we may still make some analysis for short run once you fixed the level of capital. Then it will correspond to short run production function. Is that clear? Yes or no? Yes. All right. Labor capital isoquant. Q0, Q1, Q2, Q3. All right. So the very first thing is that on the labor capital plan, we may have numerously many isoquants. So for each isoquants, there are a lot of combinations of labor and capital. So with this combination of labor and capital, many labor, few capital, or few labor and a lot capital. So we may call this as labor intensive. We may call this capital intensive, right? Once again, why it is labor intensive? You'll see many workers with only a few machines. But you will see, okay, only say 10 workers, but with a lot of machines. So it's capital intensive, labor intensive. Okay? And as the topic of production, we'd like to analyze something very important. It's about cost. So if you are the firm, you are producing something, and what about your cost? What about your cost? If you remember, your total cost equals total variable cost plus total fixed cost, right? In the short run. Because in the short run, there is some factor must be fixed, cannot change, right? So it's a short run issue. However, if it is a long run issue, then we will have no distinction between variable and fixed cost. It's just total cost. And total cost is composed of two important things. It's because the production function is by capital and labor. So the production is by capital and labor. Therefore, the cost would be divided into two parts. Labor with wage rate. So if you hire, say, 50 workers, you have to give them or pay them salary. So it's the wage rate by person, okay? So for each labor, you got to pay W. And you hire this many workers, you have to pay this. So this cost come from labor, okay? And this part is the rent for the capital. If you wanted to use capital, you have to pay the rent. The more capital you adopt, the more payment you have to, or the higher cost you have to pay to the capital.